Hey everyone, welcome back to Corporate Decoder. Today we're diving into a filing that might make you think twice about what is really going on behind the scenes in certain investments. KKR FS Income Trust is looking to raise some serious cash, and they're telling us all about how they plan to do it and some of the numbers behind their recent activity. This isn't your typical quarterly report, but it gives us a peek into how these investment trusts operate and the kind of money they're moving. Before we dive in, make sure you are subscribed to the channel for more decoding of these essential corporate documents. And if you want to connect with other finance enthusiasts, join our Discord community, linked in the description below. So what is the big news here? KKR FS Income Trust, which we'll call the company, has been busy. Back on December 1st, they issued and sold a little over 1 million shares of their Class I shares. Now, the final count of these shares wasn't even locked in until December 23rd, which is pretty interesting. They managed to raise about $32 million from investors for these shares, all through special agreements called subscription agreements. Now, the way they sold these shares is pretty standard for these kinds of investment vehicles. They're doing this as part of what they call a continuous private offering. This means they're selling shares directly to investors over time, rather than through a big public sale. They're relying on a specific section of the Securities Act of 1933, which is a law that governs how companies sell stocks. This particular exemption, Section 4A2, allows companies to sell securities to a select group of investors without having to go through the whole lengthy registration process with the government. A key part of this exemption is that the investors have to be what they call accredited investors. Think of this as a status for wealthy individuals or institutions who are considered financially sophisticated and can handle the risks of investing in private deals. The company essentially took the investors' word for it that they met this criteria, which is a pretty common practice in these private offerings. Now, let's talk about the value of what they're offering. As of November 30th, 2025, the net asset value per S-share for these class iShares was $29.77. This value is determined by the company's own internal methods for figuring out what their assets are worth. And the total value of everything the company owns after subtracting its debts was a hefty $1.508 billion as of that same date. That is a lot of money. This brings us to the status of their ongoing private offering. The company is looking to raise up to a massive $5 billion through this continuous sale of shares. As of the date of this report, they've already sold over 51 million Class I shares, bringing in approximately $1.502 billion. They mentioned that some of these numbers have been revised from previous reports, which is something to keep an eye on. And importantly, these figures don't even include any shares that might have been sold through something called a distribution reinvestment plan, which is a way for investors to automatically reinvest their earnings back into more shares. The company plans to keep selling shares on a monthly basis, so this offering is definitely ongoing. Alright, let's wrap up with the exhibits section. Usually this is where you find all the supporting documents and disclosures. In this case, the most notable exhibit listed is the cover page interactive data file, which is basically embedded within the larger electronic filing itself. This allows for easier automated processing of the report's key information. And finally, the signatures. This confirms that KKR FS Income Trust officially submitted this report signed by Stephen S. Seifert, their General Counsel and Secretary, on December 23rd, 2025. So what does all this mean for KKR FS Income Trust? Well, they're clearly in a growth phase, actively selling shares to expand their investment portfolio. The continuous private offering model allows them to raise capital steadily, but it also relies heavily on attracting accredited investors who can understand and stomach the risks of these less regulated investments compared to publicly traded stocks. The net asset value figures give us a snapshot of the company's worth, and the ongoing offering shows their ambition to significantly increase that value. The strategy here is to keep bringing in new money to invest, which is typical for funds that aim to grow over time. A potential risk to consider is the reliance on accredited investors. If the market for these investors tightens, or if their perception of risk changes, it could slow down their fundraising efforts. Also, the fact that they are revising prior numbers, even if for good reason, suggests that the valuation and sale process for these private shares can be complex and subject to adjustments. Overall, KKR FS Income Trust appears to be executing its strategy to raise substantial capital through private placements. The success of this strategy will ultimately depend on their ability to continue attracting the right kind of investors and to generate solid returns on those investments to justify the current valuations. Alright, that is our breakdown of KKR FS Income Trust's latest filing. What is your take on these numbers and what they signal for the company's future? Do you think this continuous private offering model is a sustainable way to grow? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this analysis was valuable, hitting that like button really helps the channel grow. and subscribe for more deep dives into corporate finance, and don't forget to check out the Discord community in the description for more discussions. Thanks for watching. See you next time.